Hey guys, tonight we drift back, way back, to a cold December evening in Boston, 1773. The kind of night where the air stings your cheeks, your breath fogs the air, and the streets echo faintly with the crunch of frost under worn boots. You can almost smell the harbor before you see it, a mix of saltwater, pine tar, and something bitter that feels like frustration. It's the smell of a city on edge. And you probably won't survive this, historically speaking. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and your local time down in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little history family stretches across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of Boston Harbor, the wind tugging at your coat as if it's impatient for something to happen. The moon glimmers across the frozen water, and the ships anchored their creek like restless animals. It's 1773, and you're surrounded by a colony that feels trapped, like a kettle left too long on the fire. The British Crown, in all its powdered wig wisdom, has been taxing everything it can: paper, paint, glass, and most famously, tea. You hear locals grumble about it everywhere, at the market, in the church pews, even as they ladle stew over their firelit dinners. The irony? The Tea Act was actually meant to make tea cheaper. But as one man mutters beside you, it ain't the cost, it's the principle. Historians still argue whether this frustration was about liberty, economics, or just a good excuse for rebellion. But tonight, none of that matters. What matters is that Boston feels like it's holding its breath. A gust of wind makes you pull your scarf tighter. Across the street, a group of men huddle beneath the glow of a lantern. You can't hear their words, but you catch fragments: taxation, parliament, rights, freedom. Their eyes dart nervously, as though even the shadows might be listening. One of them notices you watching and offers a small nod before disappearing into an alley. Maybe he's heading toward one of the taverns where the real talk happens, places like the Green Dragon, where whispers are as powerful as muskets. You make a mental note to follow later. A horse clops by, dragging a cart filled with barrels. The driver curses under his breath about that cursed East India Company. The company's tea is what this whole mess is about, tea that sits untouched on ships in the harbor, waiting for permission to unload, permission that will never come. The city feels restless, alive in its discontent. You pass a group of women hanging laundry and overhear one sigh: "If men drank less tea and did more thinking, maybe we'd be free by now." You smile faintly. Colonial sass is timeless. A quirky detail slips into your thoughts. Did you know that some households actually boycotted tea so fiercely they brewed Liberty tea from raspberry leaves and sage instead? It probably tasted like boiled regret, but it was patriotic regret. You turn a corner, and suddenly the glow of the harbor lights fills your view again. The ships, Dartmouth, Eleanor, Beaver, loom like ghosts. Each holds hundreds of chests of tea worth thousands of pounds. That's not just money, it's a statement. And every crate left aboard feels like an act of quiet defiance. You pause on the dock, letting the cold seep through your boots, and think about how strange revolutions are. They don't begin with gunfire or grand speeches. They begin in moments like this: small, cold, uncertain. From a nearby tavern, a fiddle starts up, its tune oddly cheerful against the winter gloom. Inside, you can almost imagine the warmth, the flicker of candles, and men leaning close over mugs of ale, plotting something they can't yet name. The harbor creaks again. A flag flutters against the mast, and for a brief moment, you swear the entire city hums. Something is coming. You can feel it in the air, in the salt, in your bones. And as you glance toward the distant lights of the town, you realize that history isn't some far-off story. It's about to happen right here, right now, and somehow, you're part of it. The next morning, you wake to the sound of church bells and the faint chatter of merchants setting up their stalls. The city seems ordinary enough, but beneath the rhythm of daily life, something invisible hums. Boston feels like a stage right before the curtain rises, quiet, but heavy with expectation. You pull your coat tighter and begin walking down the narrow cobbled street, where frost still clings stubbornly to the edges of roof tiles. You pass by a bakery, the smell of warm bread cutting through the cold. Inside, two men argue quietly about Parliament's latest decree, voices rising and falling like waves. The king thinks we'll just sip his tax tea and smile, one says, slamming his hand on the counter. He doesn't know Bostonians. The other man smirks, we'll give him a surprise he won't forget. The baker clears his throat loudly, pretending not to hear. As you step back into the street, you can almost sense the growing irritation spreading through town. It's not just about tea anymore. It's about control, about being told you don't have a voice. The British Empire seems far away, but its rules feel suffocatingly close. Down by the harbor, you spot the Dartmouth, still sitting idle, its sails slack. According to local law, it has 20 days to unload its cargo, or it'll be seized. That clock is ticking and everyone knows it. The tension is as tangible as the cold wind. A historical fact floats through your drowsy thoughts. It wasn't just Boston affected by the Tea Act. Other colonies like New York and Philadelphia had also refused to let the ships unload. But Boston was unique. Its governor, Thomas Hutchinson, insisted the tea be landed and taxes paid. He was a loyalist through and through, and his stubbornness would soon light a fire even he couldn't control. You wander toward the Old South Meeting House, a squat building of brick and conviction. It's here that thousands of colonists, merchants, laborers, farmers, even curious teenagers, have gathered night after night to debate what to do. You can almost hear the echo of their voices as you push through the phantom crowd. No taxation without representation. They chant, their words rising like heat in the cold December air. A man near the pulpit slams his fist against the wood and shouts, "This tea shall not be landed." The crowd roars. And though it's centuries later, you feel it, the power of collective frustration wrapped in hope. But not everyone agrees. Historians still argue whether the anger was genuine or fueled by wealthy merchants who feared competition with the East India Company's monopoly. You can picture it now, some men shouting for liberty, others quietly calculating profit. Revolutions are messy like that. Later, as you drift down Milk Street, you overhear a woman muttering, "My husband's too scared to join the meetings, says we'll hang for treason." You glance at her hands, rough from work, and realize this rebellion isn't born just from speeches. It's born from daily exhaustion, from people who've been pushed too far for too long. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind. Some colonists started using Liberty petticoats, sewing clothes out of locally made fabric instead of imported British textiles. Even fashion became a weapon. Who knew rebellion could look so handmade? As dusk creeps in, the city changes tone again. The taverns fill up, the smell of ale and wood smoke spilling into the streets. You duck into one, drawn by the warmth and the low murmur of voices. Inside, the air is thick with anticipation. Men huddle over rough wooden tables, maps spread between them, candlelight flickering across their faces. You catch bits of conversation. Sam Adams, John Hancock, names whispered like secret passwords. One man leans in and says quietly, "If the governor won't listen, then we'll show him who Boston really is." There's a murmur of agreement, soft but firm. You lean back in your chair, the wooden legs creaking beneath you, and watch as history starts to gather itself like a storm. Outside, the harbor winds whistle through the masts, and somewhere in the distance, the faintest sound of waves slapping against the hulls feels like a countdown. The tea sits waiting. The people are restless. And in that restless silence, you realize you're standing at the edge of something that's about to break wide open. You wander through the narrow, winding streets of Boston as the day bleeds into night. Lanterns flicker in windows, and the smell of ale and wood smoke drifts through the crisp December air. You can feel it. The whole city is holding its breath, like it knows something important is coming but doesn't dare name it. The tension is heavy enough to taste. You stop outside the Green Dragon Tavern, a low-slung building with a crooked sign and warm lights spilling through the shutters. Inside, the sound of clinking mugs and muffled conversation hums like the heartbeat of a secret. You step in, the wooden floor creaking under your boots, and take a seat in the shadowed corner. The tavern isn't just a place to drink, it's where ideas ferment, where rebellion takes its first nervous breath. At a table near the hearth, a group of men speak in hushed tones. Samuel Adams leans forward, his voice steady but urgent. "The time for talk is ending," he says, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "If we let the tea be unloaded, then we surrender everything we've stood for." John Hancock, sharp-dressed and thoughtful, nods but stays silent, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the mug before him. You watch the others, carpenters, dockworkers, merchants, even a few young boys pretending to look older than they are. They listen like every word is a spark that might set the city ablaze. One man mutters, "If we act, we'll be branded criminals." Another answers, "Then we'll be criminals for liberty." The words hang in the smoky air, fragile and fierce all at once. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, and a cold draft snakes across the room. Someone laughs nervously, trying to lighten the mood, but even that sound feels forced. You sip your imaginary ale, its warmth spreading slowly, and realize that this is what history feels like before it's history: ordinary people, scared and uncertain, but too angry to stay still. A fun, quirky detail slips into your drowsy thoughts. Some of these meetings were disguised as Masonic gatherings, to throw off suspicion. Picture it, grown men with secret handshakes, pretending to discuss brotherhood while actually plotting to dump thousands of pounds of tea into the harbor. Colonial theater at its finest. Historians still argue whether these men were radicals or opportunists. Some claim Samuel Adams deliberately provoked chaos to push the colonies toward independence, while others believe he simply rode the wave of public outrage. But you can tell by the look in his eyes, this isn't about fame. It's about frustration turned into focus. A door opens suddenly, letting in a gust of icy air and a man with flushed cheeks. "Governor Hutchinson won't back down," he announces. The room goes quiet. He says the tea must be unloaded. The deadline's almost up. For a moment, no one speaks. Then Adams stands, his voice calm but heavy. "Then we'll take matters into our own hands." You feel a chill run through you, and it's not from the cold. The men rise one by one, as if pulled by gravity toward destiny. They exchange brief nods, words unspoken but understood. The air crackles, alive with purpose. You follow them outside, where snow begins to drift from the dark sky. The streets are almost empty now, the city asleep, or pretending to be. The men scatter into the night, blending into the shadows, heading toward quiet homes where they'll whisper plans and carve wooden disguises. You walk alone for a while, your footsteps echoing softly between brick walls. The harbor lies ahead, dark and still, the ships like sleeping beasts. You pause by the water's edge, watching the faint lanterns sway on the decks, and wonder if the sailors sense what's coming. Probably not. Revolutions rarely send invitations. In the distance, a bell tolls. Somewhere, a dog barks. And you can almost hear the rhythm of history, steady, inevitable, like the tide creeping closer to the shore. A small boy runs past you, laughing, chasing after a rolling hoop. You smile faintly, knowing he'll grow up in a country that doesn't yet exist. The thought feels both thrilling and impossible. The wind picks up again, carrying with it the scent of salt and wood smoke and the faintest trace of tea. You close your eyes and breathe it in. The storm hasn't broken yet, but you can feel it gathering, one whisper, one secret meeting, one sleepless night at a time. The harbor looks almost serene at dawn, though you can sense that calmness is a lie. The ships bob gently on the dark water, Dartmouth, Eleanor, and Beaver, each one heavy with tea that no one dares to touch. You stand at the edge of Griffin's Wharf, breath steaming in the bitter morning air, and stare at those anchored silhouettes like they're 3 floating powder kegs waiting for a single spark. Seagulls wheel overhead, crying out like restless witnesses. Dockworkers shuffle past, pretending to go about their business, but you can feel the unease beneath their silence. Everyone knows the ships are trouble. They've been sitting here for weeks, their cargo sealed, their fates uncertain. The rules are simple. Within 20 days of arrival, the tea must be unloaded and duties paid, or it can be seized by customs officials. The first ship, Dartmouth, has been here since late November, and its deadline is fast approaching. You do the math and realize, tonight might be the night something gives. A voice beside you mutters, "It's not the tea, it's the tyranny." You glance over at an old man, face lined by years of wind and worry. He stares out at the ships as if looking through them. They think they own us, he says, but they've never set foot in our shoes. You nod, because there's really nothing else to say. Historians still argue whether most Bostonians truly supported what would soon happen. Some accounts suggest the majority just wanted peace and cheaper tea. Others believe the whole city was united in defiance. The truth, as usual, sits somewhere in the fog, hard to see clearly, but undeniably there. You wander along the dock, listening to the creak of the ship's ropes and the slap of waves against the wooden posts. The cold bites at your fingers, but your mind hums with the rhythm of the city behind you. Meetings, whispers, arguments. Every cobblestone seems to echo with the same question. What happens if we do nothing? A quirky detail drifts through your thoughts. Some of the tea on these ships came from China, packed tightly in 342 wooden chests. Imagine it, leaves grown on a hillside halfway across the world, destined for elegant drawing rooms in London, now sitting here in frozen Boston, about to become the most famous tea no one ever drank. You stop at the end of the pier and peer into the dark water. Your reflection shimmers, ghost-like, beside the shadow of the nearest ship. For a moment, you feel caught between worlds, part of the calm surface, part of the deep unrest below. From somewhere behind you, voices rise, dockworkers gossiping, maybe, or merchants arguing over the inevitable. You catch fragments of their talk. Adams won't back down. Governor's guards'll protect the tea. Ain't enough guards in the world for what's coming. You can't help but smile at that last one. You wander toward a nearby warehouse where men unload crates of goods from a smaller vessel. The smell of molasses and fish mingles unpleasantly, but you don't mind. It feels grounding real. Someone's got to keep life going, even when history's about to lose its patience. Then you hear it, a sharp whistle cutting through the cold air. A small group of men stand near the dockmaster's shack, eyes darting toward the ships. They exchange quick nods before melting back into the alleys. They move like people rehearsing for something big. You don't know it yet, but they'll be among the first to take action tonight. The sun slips lower, its light turning the frozen water into sheets of bronze. Boston's skyline, modest and uneven, glows in that dying light like a city caught between eras. You feel it in your bones, the world is about to tilt. A British soldier patrols nearby, musket gleaming, boots crunching on the frost. He doesn't meet your eyes. Maybe he senses it too, that something unstoppable is rolling toward him. The empire is vast, powerful, certain of itself, but right now, standing here on this quiet dock, you can tell that certainty is starting to crack. The wind picks up, cold and briny, carrying the faint creak of the ship's masts and a smell that's half salt, half destiny. You stand there a long time, hands deep in your coat, watching the horizon darken and the lanterns flicker to life across the harbor. Tonight, Boston won't sleep. And neither will you. Night folds itself around Boston like a thick wool blanket. The streets are quieter now, emptied of merchants and gossip, but you can feel something stirring underneath the silence. A sound you can't quite name, like anticipation breathing softly in the dark. You follow it through winding alleys, past shuttered shops and frosted windows, until you reach a meeting place you already know too well. The Green Dragon Tavern glows faintly in the distance, a pulse of warm light in the cold. You slip inside, and the smell of smoke, ale, and damp wool greets you like an old friend. The mood is different tonight, sharper, quieter, more deliberate. Men gather in small groups, their whispers clipped, their glances darting toward the door each time it opens. You recognize a few faces: Samuel Adams, calm as ever, his expression unreadable, a burly dockworker with soot-stained hands, a young apprentice who looks far too nervous for what's ahead. On the table before them lie scraps of cloth, bits of feather, streaks of dark paint, and rough blankets. At first, it doesn't register, but then you realize they're disguises. The men are dressing themselves as Mohawk Indians, a curious mix of practicality and symbolism. The choice isn't random. The Mohawk were seen as fierce and free, everything these colonists longed to be. One man dips his fingers into soot and streaks it across his face, the lines rough and uneven. He laughs under his breath, a sound caught between nerves and excitement. "Think this'll fool anyone?" he asks. Another replies, "We ain't here to fool them. We're here to make a point." A quirky little fact tickles your drowsy thoughts. Despite what many imagine, the disguises weren't elaborate. No full feathers or elaborate paint, just rough blankets, a few smudges, and an intent to look foreign enough to hide identities. In truth, anyone who knew these men probably recognized them anyway. Boston was a small place, and secrets never stayed secret long. You can almost hear the echo of boots scuffing the floor, the scrape of wooden chairs as they stand one by one. Adams raises his hand. The room falls into stillness so deep you can hear the fire crackle. His voice, low but sure, carries the weight of the moment. "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." The words hang there like the spark before an explosion. It's a signal, the one everyone's been waiting for. They move quickly, purposefully, without another word. You follow them out into the night, the cold air biting your skin, the sound of boots crunching against frost in unison. They move like shadows, nearly 100 of them, slipping down toward the harbor with quiet determination. You keep pace beside a young man, his breath shallow, his eyes wide. "You scared?" you whisper. He nods once. "Terrified," he admits. But not enough to stop. His honesty hits you harder than the wind. Historians still argue whether this act was spontaneous or meticulously planned. Some say the Sons of Liberty had prepared for weeks, others that the decision came in a rush of frustration after the governor's refusal. But walking here, through the cold streets and quiet breath of history, it feels less like strategy and more like inevitability. As the group reaches Griffin's Wharf, they stop to gather. The harbor lies before them, dark, still, and waiting. The ships rest silently, their outlines clear against the faint light of the moon. Someone lets out a soft whistle, and you feel it, the calm before rebellion. The men begin to split into small groups, each heading toward one of the ships. They tighten their blankets, adjust their makeshift masks. One man mutters something about wishing he'd eaten more supper. Another laughs nervously, earning a sharp "shoo" from someone ahead. You glance down at your own reflection in a puddle, half shadow, half participant, and realize you're part of this now, carried along by something bigger than fear or logic. You hear the soft splash of oars, the creak of wood, the low murmur of determination. The night smells of salt, tar, and tension. Every sound feels louder than it should, the clink of a rope buckle, the distant call of a watchman, the whisper of your own breath. The disguises might not be perfect, but the resolve behind them is flawless. And as the first men step onto the ships, torches flickering faintly in the dark, you can feel history take its next quiet breath in. You stand at the edge of Griffin's Wharf, the cold air biting harder now, as if even the wind knows something irreversible is about to unfold. The harbor lies still under a ghostly moon, the three ships rising and falling gently with the tide, Dartmouth, Eleanor, Beaver, each one holding its own secret weight of expectation. You can hear the faint creak of wood, the whisper of rope, and beneath it all, the quiet murmur of men moving with purpose. You follow them, figures draped in rough blankets, faces smudged with soot and ash, voices low and steady. They board the ships with eerie calm, no shouting, no fanfare. Just soft thuds of boots on wood, the muffled clank of hatches being lifted, and the faint splash of waves brushing against hulls. It's not chaos, it's precision. They know exactly what to do. You climb aboard behind them, your hand brushing against the frozen rail. The air smells of salt and damp wood. A sailor stands nearby, his eyes wide but his body frozen in place. "We mean you no harm," one of the disguised men says evenly. "Stand aside and you'll be safe." The sailor nods quickly, backing away, his fear as visible as the fog that rolls from his breath. A moment later, you hear the sharp crack of an axe. Then another. And another. Wooden crates split open, and the scent of tea leaves, rich, earthy, slightly floral, floods the cold air. One man laughs softly. "Smells expensive," he says. The others chuckle, but no one stops working. One by one, the chests are pried open and heaved overboard. The splash of each crate hitting the water echoes through the harbor like a drumbeat of rebellion. You watch as the tea spreads out, dark tendrils unfurling beneath the surface, staining the moonlit water. It's beautiful in a strange, defiant way, like watching a painting come to life in the middle of the night. Historians still argue about how much tea was destroyed. Most say 342 chests, worth nearly £10,000. A fortune, really. Others suggest even more was dumped in the chaos that followed. What's certain is that not a single chest was stolen. Not one man pocketed so much as a leaf. They weren't looters, they were making a point. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your sleepy thoughts. One man reportedly tried to sneak some of the floating tea home in his coat. When the others caught him, they chased him through the streets until he dropped it all. Even rebellion, it seems, had rules. You move carefully across the deck, watching the men work. Some chop, some haul, some just stand guard, their breath rising like steam. The water below is now thick with tea leaves, swirling like smoke across the surface. The smell, earthy, bitter, strangely calming, wraps around you until it feels like the entire harbor is steeping in history. A voice calls out from the next ship, "Make sure nothing's left." Another answers, "Nothing but the king's pride." Laughter ripples softly through the night, brief and sharp before fading back into silence. You pause for a moment at the ship's edge, watching as the harbor ripples with floating fragments of tea. Somewhere behind you, a man hums a tune under his breath, an old sea shanty-turned lullaby for revolution. You let the rhythm of it lull you slightly, the repetition soothing, hypnotic. The moon shifts higher, catching on the surface of the water. The tea glistens like spilled ink, spreading slowly toward the shore. You think about how tomorrow, the world will look at this act and either call it madness or courage. Maybe both. As the last few chests are hurled overboard, the men gather again, breathing hard, hands raw from work. There's no shouting, no victory cry, just quiet satisfaction. One of them kneels, scrubs the deck with a broom, making sure no loose tea remains. "Leave it clean," he says. "We came with purpose, not vengeance." You glance down at your boots, now dusted with fragments of damp leaves. Somewhere out there, the water carries away thousands of pounds of defiance, tea that will never be brewed, but whose consequences will steep for centuries. The night grows still again. The men file off the ships silently, disappearing into the fog. No one speaks. No one looks back. The harbor is calm, the moon unmoved, but you know that history has already shifted, just a fraction, but enough to change everything. And as you stand alone on the wharf, the faint smell of tea clinging to your clothes, you realize something strange: revolutions don't always roar. Sometimes they whisper. Dawn creeps slowly over Boston, pale and uncertain. The harbor that shimmered in moonlight only hours ago now lies gray and rippling under a cloudy sky. You stand at the edge of Griffin's Wharf again, boots damp with frost, watching as the tide carries away the last traces of floating tea leaves. The smell still lingers, a faint bitterness, like history steeping itself into the morning. The ships look almost innocent now, emptied of their burden, their decks clean and quiet. A few British sailors move cautiously about, their faces drawn tight with disbelief. One of them kicks at a stray bit of soggy tea with his boot and mutters something you can't quite hear. Maybe it's a curse. Maybe it's awe. Word spreads fast. By the time you walk back toward the town square, the streets are alive with murmurs. Shopkeepers whisper in doorways, housewives lean out of windows, and children run barefoot down the cobblestones shouting, "They threw it all away. Every last chest." The news ripples outward like a stone dropped into calm water, small at first, but unstoppable. You stop by a group of men gathered near the Old South Meeting House. One of them reads aloud from a scrap of paper, a list of the destroyed cargo. His voice trembles slightly, either from excitement or fear. £10,000 worth, he says, looking up. All gone. No one stopped them. Another man, older and more cautious, crosses his arms. They've gone too far, he mutters. The king won't forget this. Historians still argue whether Boston was proud or frightened the next morning. Some accounts say the townspeople rejoiced quietly, seeing it as a clean victory. Others claim there was unease in the air, a sense that they had crossed an invisible line and there would be no going back. You can feel both emotions swirling here like the tides, equal parts triumph and dread. A quirky detail drifts into your half-awake thoughts. Locals who went down to the harbor the next day complained about the water tasting faintly of tea for weeks afterward. Imagine the irony: Boston Harbor, the world's largest teacup. As you walk further, you spot a British officer inspecting the wharf, his red coat vivid against the morning fog. He bends to scoop up a handful of wet leaves from the water's edge, rubbing them between his fingers as if the evidence might somehow explain itself. His jaw tightens. You don't need to hear his thoughts to know what they are. Someone will pay for this. Down the street, tavern doors swing open. Inside, the talk is loud, excited, reckless. One man raises his mug and toasts, "To freedom." Another laughs and replies, "To cold tea and warm hearts." But even amid the laughter, you catch the nervous glances toward the door. Everyone knows the British response won't be gentle. You drift into one of the taverns, letting the heat from the hearth chase away the chill. The air smells of smoke and ale, voices layering over one another like waves. Someone sketching the scene from last night on a scrap of parchment, a rough drawing of men on ships, crates flying into the sea. The ink bleeds where the artist's hand trembles. "Think they'll call it rebellion?" he asks. His friend shrugs. "Maybe. But they'll remember it." You sit for a while, half listening, half dreaming. Outside, the city hums with nervous energy. The tea is gone, but the consequences are just beginning to steep. As the morning sun rises higher, a strange calm settles over Boston. No arrests, no soldiers marching through the streets, just quiet. Too quiet. You can sense the empire watching even from across the ocean, its pride wounded, its patience thinning. You walk again to the harbor, where a few townsfolk gather, staring at the empty ships. A young boy beside you squints at the water and whispers, "It looks peaceful now." You nod, but your mind stirs with the uneasy knowledge that peace like this never lasts. In the distance, a church bell tolls. The sound rolls through the cold air, solemn and steady. You take one last look at the harbor, the faint glimmer of sunlight on the water, and realize how surreal it all feels. The calm morning after a quiet act of rebellion that will echo for centuries. The men who acted last night have melted back into daily life, blending into the crowd as if nothing happened. But you know better. The tea may be gone, but something else has been poured into the world, something that can't be swept away or silenced. And as you turn toward the waking city, the chill easing just slightly from the air, you feel it deep inside. This isn't the end of anything. It's the beginning. By the time word of the Boston Tea Party crosses the Atlantic, winter has settled thick and heavy over London. You can almost picture it, the gray Thames churning beneath the fog, the muffled sound of carriage wheels splashing through the rain, the distant bells of Westminster ringing across the city. The empire's heart is beating steadily, unaware that a bruise has already begun to form. You drift there in your imagination, across the cold sea and into the polished halls of British power. The air smells of damp wool, candle wax, and ink. In a high-ceilinged chamber lined with portraits of stern-faced kings, officials gather around a long mahogany table. The letter from Boston lies open before them, its words sharp as frost. 3 ships, 342 chests, all destroyed. Not a single soldier harmed, but every ounce of tea gone. The silence that follows isn't confusion, it's offense. The kind of silence that trembles with insult. One lord finally breaks it, slamming a ringed hand on the table. "An outrage," he declares. "An act of open rebellion." Another mutters that the colonists have grown spoiled with freedom. You can almost see the anger ripple through the room like heat. Historians still argue whether the king's rage was personal or political. George III was known for his temper and his stubborn pride. Some letters hint that he saw the Boston Tea Party not as a protest, but as a personal challenge to royal authority. Either way, the decision comes swiftly. The colonies must be punished, and Boston must be made an example. A quirky detail drifts through your sleepy mind. News of the Tea Party was so shocking that some Londoners thought it was satire when they first read it in the papers. No Englishman, one editor scoffed, would destroy tea. Clearly, he hadn't met a Bostonian. Back in the colonies, you can feel the tension tightening like a noose. Ships carrying official decrees arrive by spring. The punishment comes in a series of laws that sound tidy on paper but taste bitter in practice. The coercive acts, the colonists call them, the intolerable acts, more truthfully. Boston's harbor is closed until the East India Company is repaid for every grain of tea. No ships in, no ships out. Trade collapses. Fishermen go hungry. Merchants stare at empty shelves. You walk those streets again in your imagination, and the city feels different, quiet but seething. The docks that once smelled of salt and goods from faraway lands now reek of stagnation. Soldiers patrol at every corner, red coats stark against gray walls. The taverns that once buzzed with laughter now murmur with anger. One man leans over a bar and says, "We're prisoners in our own town." Another spits into the ashes of the hearth and mutters, "Then maybe it's time to break out." You pause to look around and realize something remarkable is happening. The punishment meant to isolate Boston has done the opposite. It's uniting the colonies. From New York to Virginia, supplies and letters of sympathy pour in. Cities hundreds of miles apart begin to see themselves as part of the same story. Historians still debate whether this moment, the closing of Boston Harbor, was the true beginning of the American Revolution. Some argue the Tea Party was the spark, but the coercive acts were the fuel. Either way, the fire has begun to spread. You drift through a vision of Philadelphia now, where the talk is urgent and defiant. If they can do this to Boston, a man says, they can do it to us. And suddenly, for the first time, 13 separate colonies begin to imagine themselves as one. Across the sea, the British Parliament doubles down, confident that fear will restore order. But you can feel the shift even from here. The air itself seems to hum with defiance. Empires, after all, are built on obedience. And once obedience cracks, no law can mend it. A courier gallops down a muddy colonial road, coat flapping, delivering messages that will one day fill history books. You imagine the wax seals, the hurried handwriting, the faint scent of smoke on the parchment. The words are simple but electric. Boston must not stand alone. You stand at the edge of the harbor once more, now silent and empty under the weight of blockade. The smell of old tea still lingers faintly in the timbers, but it's joined by something else. Resolve. The punishment meant to crush the city has made it a symbol. And as the wind carries the faint sound of hammers rebuilding, printing presses churning, and people whispering the word Congress for the first time, you realize that the ripples from one night's protest have crossed an ocean and come back as waves. The empire has answered, and the colonies are beginning to speak as one voice in return. The dialogue has turned into defiance, and the world is listening. You find yourself once again in Boston, but it's no longer the same restless town that tossed tea into the harbor. The air feels heavier now, thick with a strange mix of pride and exhaustion. Ships sit idle, their masts like dead trees against the pale sky. The blockade has turned the harbor from a lifeline into a mirror, flat, gray, reflecting a city waiting for something to happen. You walk through the market square, past empty stalls and shuttered shops. The smell of salt and fish is gone, replaced by dust and wood smoke. People still move through the streets, but slower now, careful. There's hunger in their faces, but also determination. Every act of kindness feels like rebellion. Neighbors sharing bread, children running messages past red-coated soldiers. And yet, amid this quiet resistance, there's something new stirring beneath the surface: organization. The word Congress is no longer a whisper, it's a plan. Delegates are being chosen, letters are flying across colonies faster than the ships that once carried tea. The Sons of Liberty meet more cautiously now, but their voices are clearer, more certain. You sit near a small printing shop late one evening, watching the press clank rhythmically in the dim light. Sheets of paper slide out one by one, ink still glistening, essays, pamphlets, poems, all calling for unity. The scent of hot ink fills the air, and you can almost hear the heartbeat of a nation still unborn. Historians still argue whether these pamphlets, more than muskets, more than speeches, were the true weapons of revolution. Words, after all, travel further than bullets and leave deeper marks. One sheet catches your eye. It reads, "When tyranny becomes law, resistance becomes duty." You trace the letters lightly with your finger. The words feel alive, pulsing with a quiet fury. Out in the streets, you hear talk of a gathering in Philadelphia, the First Continental Congress. 13 colonies, sending their best minds to decide what to do next. You can almost see them already, men in powdered wigs and worn boots, candles flickering as they argue deep into the night. Some want peace, others demand independence. None of them truly know yet what they're asking for. A quirky little story from this time floats to mind. One delegate, John Adams, complained that the Congress spent half its time debating proper decorum before it even started discussing rebellion. Imagine that, history's turning point almost delayed by a seating chart. Back in Boston, the British grow restless. Soldiers drill in the open squares, muskets gleaming, boots striking the cobblestones with mechanical precision. They think order can be restored through rhythm and discipline. But beneath that rigid cadence, you can feel something wild and unpredictable beginning to stir. At night, in the taverns and narrow alleys, talk of open resistance grows bolder. "They can close our harbor," someone mutters, "but they can't close our mouths." Another replies softly, "or our hearts." The fire is spreading now, invisible but unstoppable. You pass a group of women sewing by candlelight. They're stitching uniforms, plain, practical, defiant. One of them looks up at you and smiles faintly. "If they think we'll sit quiet, they don't know us," she says. Her hands never stop moving. Historians still debate whether most colonists truly wanted war at this point. Some were loyal to the crown, others simply wanted fairness, not freedom. But history has a way of pushing moderation aside when the moment demands extremes. Outside the city, militia groups begin to form. Farmers, blacksmiths, merchants practicing with muskets in frosty fields. They call themselves Minutemen, ready to fight at a moment's notice. You watch them from the edge of a hill one misty morning, the sound of musket fire echoing softly through the trees. It doesn't sound like war yet. It sounds like preparation. A boy too young to fight but old enough to dream watches them from the fence line. "Do you think they'll really stand up to the redcoats?" he asks quietly. You nod, though you're not sure why. Maybe because some part of you knows they will. The smell of gunpowder drifts through the cool air. The world hasn't exploded yet, but the fuse is burning fast. Boston has become both prisoner and prophet, a city held in chains, yet speaking for an entire continent. You glance once more toward the silent harbor, remembering how it all began, with tea, not blood. And now, as the sun dips low and the gulls circle over the still waters, you can almost sense that the next chapter won't be so peaceful. Spring arrives with a quiet tension that hangs over the colonies like a storm waiting to break. You can feel it even before anything happens. The way people speak in hushed tones, how farmers look toward the horizon as if expecting something to appear there. The frost is melting, the rivers are thawing, but the air still feels cold with anticipation. In Boston, British soldiers march through the streets as usual, their boots clattering against stone, their red coats glaring in the pale morning light. You walk past them and they barely glance at you now. They've become part of the scenery, resented, ignored, but always there. The presence too familiar to be shocking anymore. Yet, beneath the surface, everything is moving toward something inevitable. One night, you overhear talk in a tavern corner, rumors of gunpowder being hidden, secret drills outside the city, riders carrying coded messages north and west. The men keep their voices low, but the spark in their eyes is unmistakable. "If they come for our weapons," one says, "we'll meet them before they reach Concord." You step outside into the cool night air, and the stars seem sharper than usual, as if the whole world is holding its breath. Somewhere far off, a horse whinnies, and the faint sound of hooves fades into the distance. Historians still argue whether what happened next was planned or accidental, a deliberate clash or a misstep of fate. But history rarely waits for perfect timing. On an April night in 1775, riders gallop through the darkness, lanterns swinging, voices shouting warnings that will echo for centuries. The British are coming. You follow the sound in your mind, through narrow country lanes lined with budding trees. The air smells of dew and anticipation. Windows creak open, and sleepy faces peer out. Men pull on boots, grab muskets from above the hearth, and kiss their wives quickly before vanishing into the night. In Lexington, dawn begins to bleed across the fields. The mist is thick, clinging to the grass, blurring the line between dream and waking. A small band of militia stands trembling on the green. Farmers, merchants, boys barely grown. You can see the nervous glint of their bayonets, the faint puffs of breath in the cold air. Across the field, red coats begin to appear, disciplined, steady, advancing in formation. For a long, unbearable moment, no one moves. The world seems to hold its breath again. Then a single shot rings out. No one knows who fired it. Some say it came from behind the militia, others swear it came from the British line. Historians still argue about it, the famous shot heard round the world. You don't see who falls first, only the chaos that follows. Smoke, shouting, the smell of gunpowder thick in your nose. The first clash of the revolution isn't grand or glorious. It's confusion, fear, and the deafening echo of inevitability. By the time you reach Concord, the sun is high and the battle has changed shape. The redcoats are retreating, harried by militia firing from behind trees and stone walls. Birds scatter from the noise, and the air vibrates with something fierce and new, a belief that the colonies might actually stand a chance. A quirky story from that day. One British soldier later wrote that he was more terrified of the invisible farmers shooting from the woods than any army he'd faced before. It was as if the land itself had turned against them. You wander through the aftermath, the ground littered with spent cartridges, trampled grass, and dropped hats. There's no cheering, no triumph, just shock. You kneel beside a fallen musket, the wood still warm from firing, and realize that history has crossed a line it can never uncross. The echo of that first shot lingers in your ears long after the smoke fades. You can still hear the distant church bells ringing, the hurried whispers spreading through towns up and down the coast. It's begun. And as night returns, the stars look different now, colder, but brighter somehow. You stand under them and think of how it all started, not with a battle, not with kings or declarations, but with tea, floating in dark water under a quiet December sky. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you can almost hear the soft slap of waves against the harbor again. But this time, you know those waves are carrying something much bigger than tea leaves. They're carrying revolution. The days that follow are a blur, messages flying, drums beating, and the slow, steady realization that the world has changed. You walk through the streets of Boston again, but it doesn't feel like the same city anymore. There's a strange clarity to everything now, as if the fog that once hung over the harbor has lifted. The line between protest and war has vanished, replaced by the sound of marching feet and the smell of smoke drifting from faraway fields. Boston is still under siege, in a way. The British hold the city like a clenched fist, but the countryside bristles with resistance. Farmers leave their plows half buried in the soil and join militias. Women melt pewter dishes to make bullets. Even the silence feels purposeful now, filled with the quiet pulse of determination. You pass the Old South Meeting House, its windows still cracked from the cold. Once a place of debate, it now feels like a shrine to something larger, defiance itself. Inside, the pews are empty, dust drifting in thin beams of light. You can almost hear echoes of that December night months ago, voices rising, fists pounding, hearts daring to challenge an empire. Historians still argue whether anyone in Boston understood, truly, what they'd started. Most didn't imagine independence yet, only fairness, representation, respect. But once you pour rebellion into motion, it doesn't stay neatly contained. It spreads like ink through paper, unstoppable and irreversible. Across the colonies, the ripple becomes a tide. Committees form, militias train, and the idea of freedom, once abstract and fragile, starts to harden into something tangible. You can almost feel it taking shape, like the slow sculpting of a statue from rough stone. A quirky detail floats to mind. In the months after the Tea Party, Smugglers in coastal towns began jokingly naming their ships the Liberty or the Tea Revenge. Some even flew makeshift flags with tea leaves painted on them, a cheeky reminder that revolutions, like jokes, often begin with something small but stingingly true. You walk through a marketplace where merchants speak in cautious optimism. A woman selling bread smiles faintly and says, "They thought closing our harbor would break us. It only made us hungrier." Her words linger as you pass, warm and steady like the smell of fresh loaves. The colonies are transforming now, slowly stitching themselves together. Letters crisscross the continent, ink and wax carrying ideas stronger than muskets. The Continental Congress meets again, this time with a sharper edge to their debates. The word independence no longer sounds reckless. It sounds inevitable. And Boston, the city that began it all with a night of tea and defiance, stands as both scar and symbol. The harbor still smells faintly of salt and rebellion. The ships are gone, but their ghosts remain, rocking gently in memory's tide. You wander down to Griffin's Wharf one more time. The water glistens under a pale sunrise. Seagulls wheel overhead, calling out like watchmen of history. You kneel at the edge and touch the cold surface, feeling the faint pulse of waves lapping against the wood. Somewhere beneath that water, grains of tea still rest, silent witnesses to everything that's unfolded since. Historians still debate whether the Boston Tea Party was truly about tea, or about dignity, or about a nation learning to stand. Maybe it was all of those. Maybe it was just people deciding that enough was enough. You stand slowly, listening to the quiet hum of the city behind you. The same streets that once smelled of fear now carry the steady rhythm of purpose. Somewhere in the distance, a fife begins to play, a soft, thin melody carried by the wind. You can't tell if it's a song of mourning or of birth. Maybe both. As the first rays of morning touch the rooftops, you take one last breath of sea air and realize something simple, something unspoken. Revolutions don't start with fireworks. They start with whispers, with meetings in dimly lit rooms, with hands dropping crates into dark water. And as you turn to walk away from the harbor, the sound of the tide fades behind you, soft, rhythmic, eternal. Like history itself, it never really ends. It just keeps flowing, carrying the echoes of the past toward every tomorrow. The story begins to fade now, its edges softening like the last ripples in a quiet harbor. You can almost hear the water again, gentle and unhurried, the same water that once swallowed hundreds of chests of tea and carried a world toward change. Your breathing slows as the sounds of the past grow distant, the shouts, the gunfire, the rustle of parchment turning to silence. What remains is calm. A harbor at peace. A city asleep beneath a thin veil of mist. You picture the ships again, their sails furled, rocking gently on moonlit waves. The smell of tea has long since drifted away, replaced by the cool salt air of the Atlantic. Somewhere, far off, a bell tolls, a reminder of time passing, of history settling into memory. You imagine the people of Boston, their courage quietly woven into the fabric of what came after. They don't know they've made history, they only know they stood for something that mattered. There's something deeply human in that, standing up, even when the outcome is uncertain. Let that thought settle in you now, soft and steady. The idea that small acts can ripple outward, that courage can begin in the quietest corners. The water laps gently against the shore. The world grows slower. The air feels warmer. You breathe in once more and let go of the story, of the noise, of the centuries that followed. Just you now, drifting on the rhythm of the tide, weightless and calm. The harbor sleeps. The city sleeps. And maybe, finally, so do you.